9 years ago, my youngest daughter, Serafina, vanished by the Hudson River, leaving a hollow void inside the cold, Sterling mansion. I spent the rest of my life believing in the perfect silence that this house offered, until one Tuesday morning, when Isabella, my eldest daughter who had always cared for me with unwavering devotion, had just left the house. The phone rang, shattering the heavy stillness. On the other end was Elias, the longtime gardener, his voice trembling as if he had just brushed against a wandering soul. "Sir, please listen to me. There are faint sobs crying for help from deep beneath the ground." As an engineer, I knew every square meter of this structure, though I had never asked myself why the basement door was always sealed with the most advanced security system. A horrifying truth was stirring right beneath the foundation of my family. Before we begin, I need to say that for privacy reasons, every detail in this story has been changed. Any resemblance in names or places is entirely coincidental and unintentional. I hold no intention of linking or implying any real individual. Reopening these memories is deeply painful. If you choose to stay, leave a small sign in the comments so I know I am not telling this story alone in this silent room. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for listening. Now take a deep breath. We will begin with that fateful Tuesday morning. My name is Alexander Sterling, 62 years old. My entire life has been spent measuring walls and inspecting the stability of bridges. I never realized that my own house had been rotting from the inside. As a retired civil engineering supervisor, my world has always operated according to the unchanging laws of physics. I believe in numbers, in the strength of concrete, and the precision of 90-degree angles. If a blueprint deviates by even a tenth of an inch, the entire structure will collapse sooner or later. That is the philosophy by which I have lived, and I applied it to build a family that I once believed to be the most solid in the Hudson Valley. The Sterling Mansion stands in isolation on a hill, surrounded by ancient oak groves and a thick veil of mist that rolls in from the river every morning. It is an architectural masterpiece of stone and oak wood, though to me it resembles a museum of painful memories more than a home. That morning I sat in the library, idly rubbing the edge of an old planning map. The scent of parchment and agarwood filled the room. At 62, I should have been enjoying slow, peaceful afternoons with a cup of tea, though my mind never stopped tormenting itself over the cracks I had missed in the past. "You forgot your blood pressure medication again, Father." A low, gentle voice, sweet and authoritative, came from the doorway. It was Isabella, my eldest daughter. At 35, she was the only remaining pride of the Sterling family. A renowned interior architect with a string of international awards, Isabella possessed the beauty of a marble statue, sharp, flawless, and slightly cold. She walked into the room carrying a tray of tea and a bottle of medicine, arranged with almost extreme neatness. "Thank you, Bella," I smiled, looking at the daughter who had cared for me in place of her late mother for nearly a decade. "You don't have to do this every morning. You still have an entire design empire to run." Isabella set the tray down and gently smoothed the fabric on my shoulder. "To me, you and this house are the most important project. You know that the structure of this house requires regular maintenance, and so does your health." She glanced around the room, her razor-sharp eyes pausing on a speck of dust on the bookshelf before moving on. After their mother died from a sudden illness and her younger sister Serafina disappeared, Isabella redesigned the entire interior of the mansion herself. She said changing the space would help us escape the ghosts of the past. With her own hands, she directed the renovation of the basement into a private art studio, where she spent hours working after the sun went down. In everyone's eyes, Isabella was the embodiment of devotion. At times, in moments of stillness, I felt that her care surrounded me like a glass cage, safe and suffocating at the same time. If Isabella was the solid cornerstone, Serafina, my youngest daughter, had once been the brightest light of this house. 9 years ago, she suddenly vanished at the age of 23, leaving behind a desperate farewell letter saying she wanted to escape the expectations of the family. The police concluded it was either suicide or a runaway case, though they never found her body beneath the rushing waters of the Hudson. Isabella was the one who comforted me through the sleepless nights when I screamed Serafina's name. Isabella persuaded me to accept the truth that Serafina was gone so we could continue living. Deep inside, guided by the instinct of an engineer, I always sensed something illogical. A girl as full of life as Serafina, someone who adored bright colors, why would she choose such a dark ending? Even so, faced with Isabella's strength and perfection, I buried my suspicions. I trusted the blueprint Isabella had constructed. That piece shattered at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. The landline rang sharply, cutting through my thoughts. Isabella had gone out to meet an important client in Manhattan. I picked up the receiver. On the other end came the sound of wind and the hurried breathing of Elias, the gardener who had served this estate for more than 20 years. Mr. Alex? Elias whispered, his voice trembling as if afraid someone might hear him. It's me, Elias. What's wrong? Did the oak tree in the back get infested again? No, not the trees. Elias lowered his voice even further, almost a hiss through his teeth. I'm cleaning the lawn on the west side, right near the basement vent. At first I thought it was the wind, but it isn't. I frowned, a cold current running down my spine. What are you talking about? Mr. Alex, listen. I hear scratching. It's very faint but steady. And then there's crying. Soft sobbing coming from beneath the west vent. Not the sound of a television, and not an animal, sir. It's the voice of a woman. She's trying to call for help, but it sounds like she has no strength left. The porcelain cup in my hand trembled slightly. The west vent leads straight down to Isabella's studio, the room she always keeps locked and says that dust will ruin the precious design samples. Are you sure, Elias? It might be the water pipes. I'm a gardener, not an engineer, but I know the difference between metal sounds and human fingernails scraping against drywall, sir. Please, go down there and check while Miss Isabella is still away. Something is very wrong beneath this house. The call ended with a dry click. I stood frozen in the library. The morning sunlight still danced across the polished bookshelves, though in my eyes everything began to distort. I looked down at the floor beneath my feet. The expensive oak flooring Isabella had chosen suddenly felt strangely fragile. For the first time in 62 years, I realized that I could calculate the strength of a bridge, though I had been completely blind to what was hidden beneath the very foundation of my own family. The wind outside grew stronger, shaking the branches of the old oaks. The whistling through the door cracks sounded like a sigh from the dead. I took a deep breath, my aging hands trembling as they searched for the spare keys Isabella always warned me not to touch. My journey into the darkness began with that echo rising from the lush green lawn. When the sound of Isabella's Audi engine echoed at the entrance, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heartbeat to its most stable rhythm. A good engineer never allows emotions to distort measurements. Dinner was served at exactly 7 p.m. Isabella is never late. She has always believed that discipline is the foundation of beauty. The dining room glowed beneath a crystal chandelier, its light reflecting across the precious bone china. Isabella had changed out of her office clothes into an elegant navy silk dress. She looked completely at ease, as if a demanding workday in Manhattan had been nothing more than a pleasant stroll. "How are you feeling today, Father?" Isabella asked, her hands skillfully slicing a piece of roasted beef tenderloin with refined precision. "You look a little pale. It might be the damp air drifting in from the river." "I'm fine, Bella. Just a little tired," I replied, my eyes fixed on her slender hands. "You always say that," she smiled, a flawless smile that concealed every thought behind it. She stood up, walked around the table, and placed her hand on my shoulder. The touch was gentle, though I sensed an invisible control within it. "You must remember that you are all I have left. I can't allow anything to happen to the foundation of this family." She calmly set the bottle of blood pressure medication beside my glass of water, then turned to prepare tea. Every movement was calculated. The amount of water, the temperature, the way she stirred the silver spoon in the porcelain cup without making even the faintest sound. Isabella's devotion resembled a perfect blueprint. No unnecessary detail, no technical flaw. The perfection itself tonight sent a chill through me. I took a sip of lavender tea. A faint bitterness spread across my tongue. "Elias called me today," I said, my voice as casual as if I were sharing idle gossip. The hand holding Isabella's teacup paused for 1,000th of a second, a delay too small for ordinary eyes to notice, though for an engineer who spent years monitoring geological vibrations, it was as obvious as an earthquake. "Oh, that old man?" She continued, sipping her tea calmly. "Let me guess, the hydrangea beds are wilting again." "No, he said he heard strange sounds on the west lawn, near the basement vent." I paused, watching her reaction. "He said it sounded like someone crying, a woman." A long silence spread across the dining room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the grand hall suddenly grew painfully loud. Isabella set her teacup onto the saucer. A dry clink. She laughed, a light, gentle laugh, clear like the sound of wind chimes, though her eyes did not laugh at all. "Father, Elias is getting senile. You know how many raccoons and shrews wander through this garden? Their noises in the ventilation pipes can sometimes turn into very disturbing sounds to an old man who tends to imagine things." She tilted her head, looking at me with feigned concern. "Or maybe it's the old plumbing system I haven't had time to replace. Copper pipes often whistle when water pressure changes. You're an engineer. You should know that better than anyone." I looked at Isabella. Her expression remained strangely calm, her smooth skin showing not the slightest ripple. If I had looked only at her face, I might have believed that I had truly become senile. But I wasn't looking at her face. I looked at Isabella's left hand holding the silver fork. Her knuckles were clenched tightly around the handle until they turned pale. The tension was visible through the blue veins rising beneath her thin skin. The fork trembled slightly, piercing deep into the steak on the plate, not to cut it, but like an act of restraining violence within. That was the crack I had been searching for. The perfect marble statue named Isabella Sterling had finally revealed a structural weakness. "Perhaps you're right," I replied, struggling to keep my voice from trembling. "Just rats or pipes?" "Of course, Father." Isabella relaxed her grip, the fork loosening, though the pale marks on her fingers took several seconds to fade. "I'll ask a technician to inspect the entire plumbing system tomorrow. You shouldn't trouble yourself with the gardener's nonsense. Your duty is to rest." She stood up, collecting the dishes with a frightening calm. "I'll go down to the basement and work for a while. The drawings for the hotel project in Dubai are reaching the final stage." I watched Isabella's figure disappear behind the door, leading to the basement. The moment the door closed, I collapsed back into the chair, cold sweat soaking through my shirt. Isabella was not afraid of what Elias had said. She feared my curiosity. She had just lied to me with a deadly calm. And the crying that Elias heard, it was not rats, and it was not plumbing. It was a truth being buried alive beneath my feet. That night, the Sterling mansion still stood firmly on the hill, though in my mind its entire architecture had begun to fracture. I knew I could not step back. I needed the real blueprint of this house, not the one my daughter had presented to me. The hands of the clock slowly crept toward 2 a.m. This was the hour when Isabella usually sank into a deep sleep after her frenzied working hours. I slipped out of bed, my steps silent on the carpet, gripping a laser measuring tape and my old notebook. I was not searching for a ghost. I was searching for a margin of error. I started outside. Beneath the thick fog typical of the Hudson Valley, I quietly measured the length of the western foundation of the house. A tiny red laser beam shot from the handheld device, touched the granite edge at the far corner, then returned the precise number on the digital screen. 18.5 meters. I wrote it down. Exterior foundation length of the west wing, 18.5 meters. Then I crept down to the basement. The oak door leading to the staircase let out a faint creak that nearly made my heart leap out of my chest. I stood frozen in the darkness for 5 minutes, holding my breath and listening for movement from Isabella's bedroom upstairs. Nothing. Only the wind whispering through the door cracks and the pounding of my own heart. Our basement was divided into 3 main areas: my wine cellar, the technical area, furnace and pumps, and finally Isabella's jewelry design studio, the place she called her temple of creativity. I began measuring inside. Wine cellar, 6.2 meters. Technical area and hallway, 4.3 meters. Isabella's studio, 5 meters. I stood there in the dim hallway, staring at my notebook. The total interior length of the rooms came to only 15.5 meters. Even after accounting for the thickness of the dividing walls, about 0.2 meters each, nearly 3 meters of length were still missing from the total 6-meter width of the house. 18 square meters, a space equivalent to a medium-sized bedroom, had completely vanished from the actual blueprint of this house. The jewelry wall in the perfect lie. I moved closer to the final wall of Isabella's studio. It was painted a soft ash gray, decorated with oak shelves displaying her delicate jewelry collections. 5 years ago, when Isabella proposed renovating the basement, I had fully supported the idea. "Father, I need a completely quiet space to preserve gemstones that are sensitive to light and temperature," Isabella had said at the time, her eyes glowing with passion. "I'll hire a private contractor who specializes in secure interior vaults, so your rest won't be disturbed." Back then, still drowning in the grief that lingered 4 years after Serafina disappeared, I had nodded without the slightest suspicion. I trusted my daughter's sense of aesthetics. I believed her strict control over the construction crew was nothing more than professional perfectionism. Now, as I placed my aging hand against the smooth layer of wall paint, I felt the difference. I tapped it gently with my knuckles. Knock, knock, the dull, solid sound of reinforced concrete from the exterior wall. Thud, thud, the hollow, echoing sound of insulated drywall behind the display shelves. This was not a load-bearing wall. It was a carefully constructed partition designed to conceal another space behind it. 18 square meters of stolen space. A renowned interior architect like Isabella would never make such a basic mistake as wasting that much area unless that area served a purpose that no blueprint was allowed to record. I sank down onto the cold stone floor, still clutching the laser measure in my hand. My engineer's mind began connecting the data points like a 3D model slowly taking shape. Cost. I recalled the payment invoices for the contractors 5 years ago. The figure was 3 times higher than a normal interior renovation. Ventilation system. Why would a jewelry studio require an independent air filtration system powerful enough for a surgical room? The smell. The sharp scent of bleach I often noticed at night. It was not used to clean the studio floor. It was used to erase the scent of life inside a sealed space with no windows. A chill ran down my spine. Those 18 square meters lay directly beneath the living room, where I sat reading the newspaper every morning. Beneath my feet, for the past 5 years, there had been a silent void Isabella had worked tirelessly to conceal. If Elias heard crying coming from the west vent, and that vent was located directly above the ceiling of this 18 square meter void, then there was only one possible answer. Someone was inside it. Serafina. The name escaped my lips like a dying breath. I looked up at the ceiling, feeling as though the entire massive Sterling mansion was collapsing onto my shoulders. I had inspected the stability of hundreds of bridges, though I had allowed my own daughter to build a prison inside our very home. Suddenly, a creak echoed from the staircase. A thin beam of light from a phone flashlight swept across the hallway. "Father?" "What are you doing here at this hour?" Isabella's voice, cold, alert, and completely free of sleepiness. She stood on the last step of the staircase, draped in a long, black silk robe like a ghost ruling over hell. I hurriedly slipped the notebook into my pocket, my heart racing like a thief caught red-handed inside his own house. Isabella's eyes in the darkness on the staircase looked like two cold flames burning away the last of my confidence. I stood there, my aging hands still sensing the vibration of the laser tape measure in my pocket, my heart pounding so loudly that I feared she could hear its chaotic rhythm through the thick air scented with wax and old wood. "What are you doing here at this hour, Father?" Isabella repeated, her voice carrying no trace of sleepiness. It was sharp, frighteningly alert. I thought I heard water running," I stammered, using every skill of emotional concealment that a supervising engineer must rely on when facing a collapsing foundation. "You know these copper pipes are more than 30 years old." I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a crack that might damage the oak floor you worked so hard to choose. Isabella remained silent for a few seconds, a silence long enough for cold sweat to soak through the back of my undershirt. Then she slowly descended the stairs, her black silk robe gliding across the floor like drifting smoke. She approached me, the heavy scent of lavender filling my nose, a fragrance I now recognize as something meant to conceal something far more rotten. "You should leave that to professionals tomorrow," she said softly, though the hand resting on my elbow tightened with unmistakable possessiveness. "Come back to bed, Father. Darkness often deceives the hearing of the elderly. You're starting to notice things that aren't really there." I allowed her to guide me back to my room like a child caught doing something wrong. The moment the bedroom door closed, I did not lie down. I stood with my back against the door, staring at my shadow stretching beneath the faint moonlight slipping through the curtains, and my mind drifted back to the fateful night 9 years earlier. It had also been a stormy night in the Hudson Valley, when the oak groves howled beneath the wind and the river seemed ready to swallow the foot of the hill. Serafina, only 23 at the time, vanished from her bedroom without taking anything except an old backpack. The next morning, while I searched frantically through the soaked bushes, Isabella was the one who found the evidence. She held a small piece of paper in her hand, trembling as she handed it to me. "Don't look for me anymore, Father. I can't live in this glass cage for another second. I'm leaving with Julian. He is the only person who sees the real me, not Father's project or Isabella's shadow. Don't worry about me. I choose freedom." Julian was a young man who lived down the hill, a rebellious soul with an old motorcycle and furious graffiti sketches. The police questioned him, though Julian swore he knew nothing. Isabella produced a series of printed messages from Serafina's computer and train tickets heading south that she claimed Serafina had secretly purchased. Everything appeared too logical, too perfect to challenge. I believed that farewell letter. I believed Serafina had chosen freedom, even while my heart shattered. For 9 years I hated Julian, and sometimes I hated my own strictness that might have driven her away. I never suspected that in the world of a renowned interior architect, forging a departure scenario could be as easy as rendering a virtual design on a computer screen. The next morning, after Isabella had already left early for Manhattan, I did not go down to the basement. I knew she had installed additional surveillance devices that I had not discovered. Instead, I went up to the attic, the family's old storage space, where dust and cobwebs served as the only loyal guardians of truth. I found the cardboard box labeled Sarah's Belongings. Inside were broken dolls, unfinished watercolor sketches, and deep at the bottom lay the blue velvet jewelry box she once carried everywhere. I opened the box, hoping to recover a trace of warmth from one of her earrings or bracelets. The interior was empty, except for a small slip of paper wedged beneath the velvet lining. It was not a letter. It was a receipt from a local pharmacy in the neighboring town, dated exactly 2 months ago. The customer's name printed on it, Isabella Sterling. I raised my eyebrows. Isabella has always worshipped organic health. She eats kale salads, drinks barley juice, and practices yoga every morning. She has never used conventional medicine unless absolutely necessary. The list on the receipt stunned the analytical mind inside me. Vitamin D3, 50,000 IU, high dosage, prescription, 4 bottles. NutriLife Total Nutritional Solution for severe exhaustion, 12 bottles. High concentration iron tablets, 3 boxes. My engineer's brain began performing a chilling chemical calculation. Vitamin D3 at 50,000 IU is prescribed only for people suffering from severe sunlight deficiency over a long period, patients with serious bone degeneration, or people who never see daylight. Why would a successful architect, someone who spends half her time at outdoor construction sites and half inside glass offices in Manhattan, require such an enormous dose of vitamin D? And why nutritional supplements meant for someone severely weakened? Isabella is young, healthy, and full of energy. The only answer struck me like a blow. She did not buy those medicines for herself. Isabella was sustaining a living body, a body wasting away from lack of sunlight, lack of movement, and lack of natural nutrition. A body imprisoned within the 18 square meter void I had measured the night before. I looked at Serafina's jewelry box. For 9 years I had mourned a ghost, while that ghost might still be breathing, still scraping at the drywall beneath my feet, still being kept alive by the very sister who shed crocodile tears on my shoulder every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Rage ignited inside my chest, a dark flame of regret. I spent my entire life supervising bridges that connected distant shores, though I had unknowingly stood upon the lid of hell itself. Suddenly my phone vibrated, a message from Isabella. "Father, I've arranged for a professional cleaning service to come this afternoon. They'll start with the attic. Please go down to the living room and don't tire yourself out with dust. Love you." She was watching me, or at least she knew I had been searching for something up here. The velvet box in my hands suddenly felt as heavy as a block of lead. I quickly slipped the receipt into my pocket, returned the box to its place, and walked down the stairs, trying to control my expression before the cleaning staff, or more precisely, Isabella's eyes and ears, arrived. My old pickup truck rolled away from the gates of the Sterling estate, leaving behind the probing stare of the cleaning crew supervisor Isabella had hired. He stood there with a walkie-talkie in hand, looking less like a sanitation worker and more like a security officer monitoring a prisoner who had just been temporarily released. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my palms slick with sweat. In my jacket pocket, the receipt for high-dose vitamin D3 felt like a burning coal, urging me to act faster before the perfect mask my daughter wore closed completely. A supervising engineer never looks only at the final result. We trace the origin of materials and the identities of those who laid the first brick. If Isabella had built a prison right beneath my feet, she could not have done it alone. She needed rough hands, people who needed money and knew how to keep their mouths shut. I pulled into a roadside rest stop in the Hudson Valley and opened the old laptop I had secretly brought with me. 5 years earlier, when the basement renovation took place, Isabella had presented me with a list of reputable contractors. But I knew that for an off-the-books structure not included in the county's building permit, she would have had to hire another subcontracting crew, people who operated in the shadows. I dug through the archived email files from the family's shared account, and there it was, a short reply mistakenly deleted into the spam folder. "The soundproof studio materials and reinforced steel door are ready. Meet at the west parking lot." Signed, S. Miller. Silas Rusty Miller, I remembered the name, a gifted carpenter, though known for his drinking and his dependence on high-strength painkillers after a workplace accident. He had once worked for me on a suspension bridge project 10 years earlier before being fired for losing control. If anyone was desperate enough to do something illegal without asking questions, it was Silas. After 2 hours tracing old connections in the construction world, I parked in front of a row of rundown rental rooms on the outskirts of the town of Poughkeepsie. The place reeked of dampness, garbage, and despair, the complete opposite of the polished splendor of the Sterling estate. I knocked on door number 14. After 3 long knocks, a gaunt man with a scruffy beard and bloodshot eyes cracked the door open. It was Silas, though he looked 20 years older than his 45. "We're not buying anything, get lost," he growled, about to slam the door shut. I blocked it with the toe of my hardened leather work boot. "I'm not selling anything, Silas. I'm Alexander Sterling. I'm here to settle an old debt, or to send you to prison." Recognizing me, he froze. Fear flashed across his murky eyes. Silas stepped back, revealing a room littered with beer cans and thick with the smell of cigarettes. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what you're talking about," Silas stammered, his trembling hands searching for a half-smoked cigarette. I stepped inside, closed the door, and looked him straight in the eye. "5 years ago, my basement. How much did Isabella pay you to build that room? The room that doesn't exist on the county's blueprints. The soundproof room where you installed an independent air filtration system." Silas collapsed onto a filthy sofa. He took a long drag from his cigarette, smoke drifting through the air. Miss Sterling said it was a panic room. You know the super rich. They're always afraid of kidnappings or robberies. She said you were starting to grow forgetful, leaving doors unlocked. So she needed an absolutely safe place to hide the expensive jewelry and to retreat if something happened. "A panic room?" I laughed, a bitter laugh. "And you believe that, Silas? A panic room where the person inside can't open the door from the inside?" Silas turned pale. I just followed the drawings she gave me. She paid in cash, a lot of cash. She said you were a strict engineer, that if you knew she had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars installing security because of your carelessness, it would hurt your feelings. I thought I was helping a devoted daughter protect her father and the family's assets. "Tell me about its structure," I said through clenched teeth, taking out my notebook. "Every detail." Silas sighed, as if telling the truth was the only way to escape the burden that had tormented him for so long. "It was a genius design, I have to admit," Silas began. His trembling voice suddenly became clearer when he spoke about his craft. "Miss Sterling asked me to erect a partition using a steel frame, covered with 3 layers of specialized soundproof drywall used for military recording studios. Between those layers was a special foam capable of eliminating all sound vibrations." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with remorse. "The door is a 2-ton steel slab, disguised perfectly as a rotating bookshelf system mounted on hydraulic rails. It runs so smoothly that even if you stand a meter away, you won't hear the electric motor moving. The ventilation system is hidden inside the grooves of the old fireplace, filtering air through a carbon filter so no strange smell ever escapes." "She told you it was for jewelry storage?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "Yes, and she asked for a small waste disposal system to be installed, connected directly to the main pipes, but disguised as a drainage line for the air conditioner. I wondered why a storage vault needed a concealed toilet, but she said sometimes she would hide there for days if armed intruders broke in." Silas stared at his nicotine-stained hands. "I thought she was just a rich young lady suffering from paranoia and loving her father too much. I never imagined, until last week, when I saw the news mentioning the disappearance of her sister again on TV. I started dreaming about the sounds I thought I had heard on the day we inspected the finished basement." "What did you hear?" I barked. "A heavy banging," Silas whispered. "At the time I was adjusting the hinges of the bookshelf. The banging came from behind the steel wall. Miss Sterling immediately turned on classical music very loudly and said it was the air pressure system adjusting. I wanted to ask more, but she handed me another stack of cash, and I needed my next dose." I left Silas's room without another word. My footsteps felt as heavy as lead along the filthy corridor of the lodging house. Everything was clear now. Isabella had not built a panic room to protect the family. She had built an absolute prison, a marvel of deception and architectural engineering to imprison her own sister right beneath my feet. She had exploited her professional knowledge, exploited Silas's desperation, and most painfully of all, exploited my own love and trust to finance this monstrous construction. I sat in the car, my head resting against the steering wheel. A choking feeling rose in my throat. 100,000 words could not fully describe the humiliation of an engineer who had spent his life building structures meant to endure, only to let his daughter build a living tomb inside his own home. Isabella had calculated every decibel of sound, every millimeter of space, and every breath Serafina would take. One thing she forgot: the instinct of a father does not operate according to technical blueprints. It runs on the rhythm of the heart, and my heart now was screaming for justice. I needed one more thing to end this. I needed to face Isabella, not as a senile old father, but as an engineer arriving to dismantle the most flawed construction of his life. The silence inside the Sterling mansion that afternoon carried a tone entirely different from usual. It was not the peaceful quiet of a wealthy suburb, but the deathly stillness that comes before a massive concrete structure splits apart. Isabella had left the house at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She was dressed elegantly in a wine-red velvet suit, carrying her crocodile leather bag and lightly kissing my cheek. "I'm meeting a partner in Manhattan, Father. The hotel project needs its final draft approved. I'll be home late. Remember to eat the dinner I've prepared in the microwave." I stood by the window, watching the black Audi disappear behind the old oak trees. I counted down. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. When I was certain she had left the Hills grounds, I moved immediately. My heart pounded wildly, not from fear but from the fury of a man who had been deceived for too long inside his own home. I went down to the basement. The oak steps creaked beneath my weight, every sound echoing like a warning. Isabella's studio emerged under the dim glow of motion sensor lights. Everything remained obsessively perfect. Spotless desks, neatly arranged blueprints, the overpowering scent of lavender oil that stung the senses. I approached the rotating bookshelf area, the place Silas had identified as the entrance to the hidden room. I ran my hand along the concealed rail beneath the carpet, feeling the sophistication of the hydraulic mechanism. Then my eyes stopped at a detail resting on Isabella's main desk. Inside the glass was still about 1/3 of filtered water. What chilled me was not the presence of the glass itself, but the droplets of condensation rolling down the outside of it. I reached out and touched the wooden desk. It was still damp. I touched the side of the glass. It was still cold. My engineer's brain immediately performed a simple thermodynamic calculation. With the basement's temperature stabilized at 22 degrees Celsius, a glass of ice water could not retain its chill and condensation that long if it had been placed there 3 hours earlier, when Isabella left the house. This glass had been set down here no more than 15 minutes ago. A cold current ran down my spine. Isabella said she had gone to Manhattan. Manhattan was at least an hour's drive from here. So who had placed this glass here? Who had drunk from it? Most importantly, why was it still icy, as if it had just come from the studio's specialized refrigerator? I looked at the drywall wall behind the bookshelf. A horrifying thought surfaced. Isabella had never left. Or she had returned through another entrance I did not know. Or she had just stepped out of that 18-square-meter room to bring water to her prisoner. I crouched down and examined the marble floor around the desk carefully. Amid the thin layer of dust the robot vacuum had missed, I saw a faint footprint. It was not the mark of Isabella's high heels. It was a bare footprint, a small one, thin and pale. "Serafina," I whispered, my voice trembling. I frantically tried pushing the bookshelf. It did not budge. It required a code or an electronic command from Isabella's phone. I slammed my fist against the soundproof drywall. Thud, thud. The hollow sound mocked me. "Sarah, is that you?" "It's Father. I'm here," I shouted, pressing my ear to the wall. The only answer was the silence of the sound-absorbing foam Silas had installed. This basement had been designed so that no scream could escape and no word of love could enter. Suddenly, a soft click sounded from the staircase. The motion sensor light at the basement entrance flared on brightly. I spun around in shock. A figure stood at the top of the stairs, completely backlit so I could not see the face clearly, only a slender silhouette carrying suffocating pressure. "What are you looking for down here, Father?" Isabella's voice echoed, calm but cold as the Hudson Valley in January. She descended step by step, her high heels striking the oak with a steady clack, 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 like a hammer knocking on a coffin. She carried no handbag, no car keys. In her hand was a mobile phone, the device she was using to monitor my every movement through the hidden camera system. "Bella, why are you here? You said you were going to Manhattan." I tried to keep my voice steady, hiding the laser measuring tape behind my back. Isabella stopped on the final step, only 3 meters from me. The studio light illuminated her face, revealing perfect but lifeless features. Her eyes were razor sharp, drilling into my mind as if stripping away every layer of truth I was trying to conceal. "I forgot my phone, Father." She raised the device, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "But it seems I came back at exactly the right moment. Are you measuring something? Or are you hearing mice behind this wall again?" She walked toward the desk, her gaze briefly passing over the glass still beaded with cold condensation. I saw Isabella's pupils tighten for a single second. Then she calmly picked up the glass and poured the remaining water into the nearby sink. "I already told you, this basement is very damp and not good for your lungs," Isabella said while wiping the watermarks from the wooden surface with a tissue, erasing the final trace of someone's presence. "You've been behaving very strangely lately, you know. From calling Elias to sneaking down here while I'm gone. I'm very worried about your mental health. Are you worried about me, or worried I'll find what you've buried for 5 years?" I burst out, unable to restrain myself any longer. Isabella froze. The air in the studio suddenly felt thinner, as if oxygen were being drained away. She did not tremble. She slowly set the empty glass on the table and stepped closer to me, her lavender-scented breath washing over my face. "Father," she whispered, her voice carrying an undisguised threat. "Do you know what happens to a bridge when its foundation pillars start betraying the overall structure? It collapses, and it drags everything above it into the abyss. Do you want us to collapse together?" I looked into my daughter's eyes and realized that the person standing before me was no longer the child I had once carried in my arms. This was an architect of evil, someone who had built an empire on her sister's suffering and was now ready to crush even her father to protect that blueprint. "Let's go upstairs, Father." Isabella took my arm, her grip so tight it bruised the flesh. "I'll make you a special herbal tea. You need a long sleep. A very deep sleep to forget these hallucinations." I let her lead me away, but my eyes turned back to the ash-gray wall one last time. That glass of cold water was living proof. Serafina was still in there. And if I had to collapse to break that wall, I would do it. That night, the Sterling Mansion was no longer a safe fortress. It became a maze of lies, where the truth was bent according to Isabella's will. After the suffocating confrontation in the basement, she showed no anger. Her composure was the most terrifying weapon of all, a kind of liquid concrete slowly hardening around my mind. Isabella led me into the living room and pressed me down into the familiar leather armchair. She did not brew the herbal tea she had promised. Instead, she opened a hidden drawer in the sideboard and took out a dark blue file folder, placing it gently on the coffee table between us. "Father," Isabella began, her voice trembling as if she were the one suffering the deepest wound. I intended to hide this for longer. I wanted you to live your retirement in a kind of artificial peace, but after what happened tonight, I realized my silence is harming you. I looked at the file. On the cover was the logo of the Hudson Neurology Center, the place where I had gone for a routine health check 6 months earlier. "What is this?" I asked hoarsely. "The results of your MRI scan and cognitive tests." Isabella opened the first page. "Dr. Miller sent them to me because he was worried you might not be clear-minded enough to receive bad news on your own. You're in the early stage of Lewy body dementia." I froze. Impossible. I can still calculate area. I can still remember every technical specification of the Verrazano Bridge. "That's long-term memory, dear father," Isabella interrupted, her eyes filling with tears, an extraordinary performance that made my spine go cold. "But your short-term memory and your ability to distinguish reality are collapsing. Visual and auditory hallucinations are typical symptoms. You see glasses of water that aren't really there. You hear Serafina crying from old water pipes. It's all just a reflection of your overwhelming grief." She pushed the sheet bearing Dr. Miller's signature toward me. Numbers, sine wave charts, complex medical terminology. Everything looked perfectly authentic. An engineer like me always believed in professional reports, and Isabella knew that very well. She was using my own religion, the precision of data, to destroy me. "Do you remember last week?" Isabella moved closer, kneeling beside the chair and taking my hand. "You told me you saw Serafina standing in the garden at sunset. I was standing right beside you at that moment, and there was nothing there except a bush moving in the wind." I don't remember saying that," I murmured, a terrible doubt beginning to creep into my mind. "Exactly. You don't remember because your brain is deleting faulty fragments of memory," Isabella sobbed, her crying so convincing it tore at the heart. "You miss her too much. Serafina's disappearance is a crack too deep in your heart, and now your mind is trying to fill that void with illusions. The crying Elias heard? You must have told him about your dreams without realizing it, and he, an old man who trusts easily, was influenced by your grief." I looked into those eyes. How could a daughter speak such cruel words with a face filled with such apparent compassion? She was turning the truth of Serafina's cries for help into a medical symptom. She was turning my search for justice into the journey of a madman. "I've already prepared medication." Isabella took out a small, unlabeled bottle. "It will help stabilize your mind and stop the hallucinations. You must take it, for me, and for your own safety." I looked at the bottle, then back at the medical file. For a moment, I was about to take it. I was about to believe I was truly insane, because the truth about one sister imprisoning another was more horrifying than any mental illness. Then I noticed a small detail on the file. The ink of Dr. Miller's signature. It had a faint sheen, the kind of ink found only in the premium pens Isabella always used to sign her architectural drawings. And the date on the report, the number 6 in June, had a tiny underline beneath it, a distinctive habit Isabella had when writing by hand, something I had noticed since she was in school. This report had not come from the Neurology Center. It had been created in the architecture office of Isabella Sterling. A wave of fury rose inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. If she wanted to play the manipulation game, I would play the manipulated man. The best engineer is the one who pretends the structure is still stable while secretly planting explosives in its foundation. "Maybe you're right, Bella," I whispered weakly, pretending to surrender. I feel so tired. My head keeps spinning." "I knew it, dear father," Isabella smiled, a radiant smile as cold as moonlight on a frozen lake. She handed me the pill. "Take it, then everything will be fine. Serafina won't cry in your head anymore." I placed the pill in my mouth, but with the skillful motion of a longtime mechanic, I hid it under my tongue. I pretended to swallow in front of her. Isabella embraced me. Her hug was so tight my ribs ached. "I'll take care of you. No one will ever separate us again, not even the ghosts of the past." I sat silently in the arms of the most devoted jailer in the world. Over her shoulder, I looked out the window, where the darkness of the Hudson Valley was swallowing everything. Isabella believed she had succeeded in rebuilding reality for me. She did not realize I had just discovered the biggest crack in her blueprint: arrogance. She believed she was smarter than her father. She believed she could control both memory and truth. But those 18 square meters beneath the basement still existed, and Serafina's cries, no matter how many times Isabella called them hallucinations, remained a physical reality waiting to be set free. I would not go insane. I would become the most lucid nightmare Isabella had ever faced. The bitter sedative tablet remained under my tongue until Isabella's footsteps finally disappeared behind the door of her bedroom. I spat it out, watching the tiny white object dissolve under the stream of the sink, feeling as though my mind itself had just slipped free from a crushing clamp. Isabella wanted me to sleep, a sleep of forgetting, so she could freely operate her secret machine. But a supervising engineer never sleeps when a structure shows signs of severe cracking. I stood in the darkness and took a deep breath. The air in the Sterling mansion tonight was thick with a strange scent I had begun to recognize through my professional instinct. The next morning, I deliberately went down to the basement early. Isabella was already in the studio, holding a bottle of essential oil spray and carefully misting the curtains and corners of the walls. The smell of lavender was overpowering, sweet to the point of nausea, filling the entire space. "You're up early, Father?" Isabella turned around, her smile bright while her eyes still carried the same unblinking scrutiny. "Did the medicine work? You look much clearer." "Maybe it did, Bella. I feel lighter." I pretended to smile as I walked closer to her desk. Standing in the center of the studio, my brain began analyzing the atmosphere. A chemical conflict was taking place here. The lavender was only a surface layer, but beneath it, seeping through the ventilation system, was the sharp chlorine smell of high-concentration bleach. To an ordinary person, it would simply smell like cleanliness. To me, it smelled like desperation. In construction work, we use strong bleach to deal with mold in sealed basements or to disinfect sanitation areas without natural airflow. Isabella used lavender to deceive my sense of smell, but she had to use bleach to maintain life in the 18 square meters behind that wall. The smell of bleach was proof of washing, cleaning waste, and maintaining the hygiene of someone kept in captivity. "This lavender smell is a bit strong, my dear," I said, waving my hand lightly through the air. "You seem to be cleaning the basement far more thoroughly than necessary." Isabella paused for a brief moment, her grip tightening slightly on the spray bottle. "I just want everything to be perfect, Father. You know how I am." She did not realize that this very perfection had betrayed her. A normal jewelry design studio would smell of metal, grinding stones, or resin. No artist would turn their workplace into a sterilized hospital filled with the pungent scent of chlorine like this. When Isabella left the house to attend a fundraising gala, where she would once again play the role of the successful and devoted architect, I began my plan. I did not use a hammer. I did not use a crowbar. I used technology. Inside my old engineer's toolkit was a device I once used to inspect deep cracks in concrete cores. A miniature endoscope camera with wireless connection, its diameter no larger than an electrical cable. I approached the rotating bookshelf. My hands trembled, but my mind was razor clear. I examined the hydraulic hinge system Silas had mentioned. There was a gap of less than 2 millimeters between the oak frame and the drywall behind it. It was the inevitable tolerance of any moving structure. I knelt on the floor and gently threaded the camera cable into that gap. On my phone screen, images began to appear. Dark, blurred, yet unmistakably real. I pushed the cable deeper, piercing through the sound-insulating foam Isabella had carefully installed. And then I saw it. Behind the elegant facade of the studio was a cold steel framework. I rotated the camera head toward the upper corner of the inner wall. Another security camera was pointing straight into the hidden room. Isabella had been monitoring Serafina 24 hours a day from her phone. I found the perfect position, just above the gap in the cover of an underground electrical box. I used industrial tape to secure my camera there. Hidden in the darkness, it could observe the entire 18 square meter space from above. I retreated to my study upstairs, locked the door, and opened the monitoring application on my computer. My heart pounded as the screen began loading the data. The room appeared. It was not the filthy dungeon I had imagined. It was a space designed with meticulous care. Cream-colored walls that were easy on the eyes, a small bed covered with pristine white sheets, a bookshelf filled with Serafina's old comic books, and a small round table. The elegance could not hide the horrifying truth. The room had no windows. The only light came from LED panels on the ceiling, simulating sunlight. Suddenly, a figure appeared within the frame. It was a woman so thin it was terrifying. Her skin was pale, almost translucent beneath the artificial light. The long hair that had once been Serafina's pride was now brittle and loosely tied behind her head. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding a marker, slowly drawing on the wall. She did not draw flowers. She did not draw houses. She drew windows. Dozens, hundreds of windows with brilliant golden sunlight streaming through them. I lowered my head onto the keyboard as hot tears rolled down my wrinkled cheeks. She was still alive. My poor youngest daughter had been imprisoned inside an artificial paradise created by her own sister. The bleach I had smelled was the scent of erasure, the scent of an effort to wipe away Serafina's identity and turn her into a decorative object in Isabella's perfect collection. I looked at the screen where Serafina had just stopped drawing and raised her head toward the ceiling, toward my camera, or perhaps toward Isabella's. Her eyes were empty, stripped of every spark of hope. "I'm here, Sarah," I whispered to the lifeless screen. "I've seen you now. This blueprint, I will tear it down even if it costs me my life." In the studio below, the scent of lavender still drifted through the air, but inside me there remained only the smell of a war about to begin. The recording from the hidden endoscopic camera began to play. I had set the motion-activated recording mode. The timeline displayed 11:15 p.m. last night, right after Isabella wished me good night and escorted me back to my room with a gentle smile. On the screen, Isabella's studio appeared silent under dim lights. Suddenly, the oak door opened. Isabella stepped in, but she had already shed the magnificent evening gown. She was wearing a thin, white medical protective suit, rubber gloves on her hands, and a mask over her face. In her hands was a plastic food tray, the kind without sharp edges, commonly used in prisons or the strictest psychiatric hospitals. She moved toward the rotating bookshelf. I held my breath, eyes fixed on every movement she made. Isabella reached out and touched a wooden fake book spine, a detail that, if not viewed from this angle, I would forever have believed to be part of the classic literature collection. Swish! An extremely quiet electric motor hummed through the camera's audio system. The entire massive bookshelf slowly rotated inward, revealing a pitch-black gap, and from within it, the bluish-white light from inside the 18-square-meter room spilled out, cutting across the studio space like an open wound. When the heavy steel door slid back, I saw Isabella step inside, and that was when my heart seemed to stop beating. From the darkness in the corner of the room within, a human figure so thin it seemed unbelievable staggered forward. When Isabella placed the food tray on the round table, an arm stretched out from beneath a thin blanket. That arm, it was no longer part of a living human body. It was skeletal, skin clinging to bone, sickly pale from nearly a decade without sunlight. Blue veins stood out clearly beneath the translucent skin like plastic wrap. The thing that made me choke for breath was the small, star-shaped birthmark on the wrist. The birthmark I used to kiss every time I carried the little girl to bed when she was 5. "Eat, Sarah." Isabella's voice came through the computer speakers, dry and devoid of emotion. "Today I made the pumpkin soup you like. I even added some extra vitamins." The other figure, Serafina, trembled as she took the plastic spoon. She said nothing. She only looked at Isabella with empty, lifeless eyes, like a doll whose soul had been broken. "Why don't you draw anymore?" Isabella asked, her hand gliding across the walls covered with imaginary windows. "I already brought more colors for you. You should be grateful that I've kept you safe here. The world outside is collapsing, Sarah. Father has grown old and senile. He no longer remembers who you are. I am the only one protecting you." Serafina shivered faintly. She dropped the spoon, her thin fingers intertwining. "You're lying. Father would never forget." Her voice was hoarse, fragile like the sound of dry leaves scraping together. This was the first time in 9 years I had heard the voice of my youngest child. It no longer carried the clarity of 20, but the tone of someone who had died from the inside. "Father already forgot," Isabella snarled, her rubber-gloved hand gripping Serafina's chin tightly, forcing the girl to look into her eyes. "He believed the fake will I wrote. He believed you ran away with that pathetic Julian. Now he only has me. You are just a ghost, Sarah. And ghosts don't need to go outside." I collapsed onto the desk, both hands clutching my tightening chest. A real heart attack, not a hallucination. I opened my mouth, gasping for breath, trying to inhale a trace of reality, but all I could smell was the bitter stench of betrayal. 9 years. 3,285 days. While I sat upstairs, torturing myself for not being a good enough father, while I looked at old photographs and silently wept from missing my younger daughter, right beneath my feet, separated by a layer of concrete and plaster, she had been tortured by her own sister. Isabella had imprisoned her sister out of insane jealousy to claim all of my affection and inheritance for herself, or simply because she wanted to be the architect of everyone's lives according to her will. She had turned Serafina into a material in her perfect construction. I looked back at the screen. Isabella was cleaning up the food tray. Before leaving, she leaned down and kissed Serafina on the forehead, a falsely tender smile so chilling it made my skin crawl. "Sleep well, little sister. Tomorrow I'll come again." The bookshelf rotated back. The studio returned to its artificial calm. But for me, the world had completely shattered. A supervising engineer always knows that when a structure has rotted from its core, the only way to save anything is to demolish it entirely. I could not call the police right now. Isabella had enough money, connections, and fabricated medical records to turn me into a mad old man hallucinating about a daughter who had disappeared. I needed another plan. A plan as insane as the way she built this prison. I wiped away my tears. My eyes now held none of the weakness of an old father being manipulated. They carried the coldness of an engineer preparing to dismantle a defective structure. "Sarah," I whispered, staring at the screen which now showed nothing but an empty room with windows drawn in marker. "Father is sorry for letting you wait so long. This blueprint, I will erase it with these very hands." That night, Alexander Sterling was no longer a prisoner in his own house. I was the hunter waiting for dawn. The final opportunity finally arrived on a foggy Monday morning when Isabella announced that she had to travel to Chicago to attend the inauguration ceremony of a skyscraper for which she had designed the main lobby's interior. "I'll be gone for 4 days, Father. I've already prepared food in the refrigerator and hired a private nurse to check your blood pressure every morning," Isabella said, adjusting the collar of her elegant coat. Her gaze swept across me, still carrying the sharp look of someone who controls everything, though perhaps because she was overly confident in the psychological test from the previous night, she had lowered her guard. I nodded, my face showing the dullness of someone supposedly subdued by tranquilizers, which in truth I had spat out the moment she turned her back. "Go ahead, Bella. I just need some quiet to finish reading a few old books." The moment the black Audi disappeared behind the row of ancient oak trees, and right after I discreetly poured the cup of tea laced with sedatives from the caretaker nurse into a flower pot in the hallway, I began to act. I knew I only had a very narrow window of time before Isabella's monitoring system sent an alert to her phone. A bleeding heart inside an old engineer no longer fears any security system. I went down to the basement, carrying a compact toolkit and a cold determination. Isabella's studio still smelled of lavender, though now all I could smell was the stench of moral decay. I approached the rotating bookshelf, my hand touching the fake wooden spine I had seen through the endoscopic camera. Behind the wooden layer was an ultra-thin digital touch panel, hidden deep inside a narrow slot barely wide enough for a finger. The screen lit up, requesting a 6-digit code. I began testing possibilities with the logic of a father. First was their mother's birthday, the only woman both sisters had truly loved. Wrong. I tried the date Serafina disappeared, a haunting number. Wrong. I tried my own birthday, then Isabella's university graduation day. Still wrong. I stood frozen, sweat running down my forehead. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a hammer striking my nerves. A supervising engineer must know how to read the mind of the architect who designed the structure. Isabella does not operate on emotion or remorse. She operates on arrogance. This code could not be a painful memory. It had to be a moment of triumph. I searched through my memory, recalling the moment when Isabella looked most radiant. The moment she looked at her sister with the eyes of someone who had achieved absolute victory. That was May 14, 2018, the day Isabella received the Best Young Architect in North America award. That was the day she officially declared herself the only genius, the day she believed she had completely surpassed and erased Serafina's shadow. My trembling fingers entered 140518. Click. The hydraulic lock sounded deep and powerful. The massive bookshelf slowly rotated on its axis, revealing the gleaming steel door behind it. I pushed forward, and the heavy door glided silently along its rail, opening to release the cold, bluish-white light of a man-made hell. I stepped inside. The space was thick with the smell of bleach and loneliness. Serafina sat on the bed, her thin shoulders trembling when she saw a strange figure intruding into her territory. She shrank back, pulling the thin blanket over her face, whispering silent prayers. "Don't hurt me. Isabella said the outside world is full of bad people. Don't touch me." Serafina, it's father," I whispered, my voice choking in my throat. I collapsed to my knees on the cold floor, extending my wrinkled hands toward her. The figure beneath the blanket froze. A pair of large, hollow eyes filled with terror slowly appeared. She looked at me, then glanced toward the door as if expecting punishment from somewhere above. "No, sister said father died. She said father had a heart attack right after I ran away. She said it was my fault, so I must stay here to repent," Serafina said, her voice trembling like a child abandoned in a deep forest. "She lied to you, Sarah. Father is still here, right above your head for almost 10 years. Father never stopped searching for you, never stopped loving you," I cried, tears of a 62-year-old man falling onto the immaculate white tiles. Serafina slowly lowered the blanket. When the LED light shone directly on my face, she recognized the familiar wrinkles, recognized the wedding ring of her mother that I still wore on my ring finger. She rushed into my arms, a body so light it seemed almost weightless, as if I were holding a dried branch drained of its life. Father is truly alive? Father didn't abandon me?" she screamed, though the cry was instantly swallowed by the thick, soundproof walls. Her sobs became nothing more than heartbreaking tremors, against my chest. I held her tightly, feeling every rib protruding beneath her thin clothing. "Why didn't you escape? Why didn't you try to call for help when Isabella opened the door?" Serafina looked up at me, her eyes clouded from malnutrition and haunted by fear. She said the whole world had forgotten me. She showed me fake newspapers saying I was a wanted criminal for stealing money from the family. She said if I went outside, the police would arrest me, and Father, the man she said was already buried, would never rest if I went to prison. I shuddered. Isabella had not only imprisoned her sister's body, she had built a perfect psychological prison. She turned herself into the only savior, the provider of food, light, and protection from a fabricated nightmare of reality. It was a cruel blueprint of manipulation. "Look at Father, Sarah." I lifted her pale face. "Outside it's spring. The old oak tree is still there. The Hudson River still flows. And Father is standing here to take you back to your real home." Serafina looked around the room one last time. The beautiful glass cage that had been deadly, the place she had called home for a third of her life. She stared at the windows drawn on the walls with marker, the bright yellow suns that now looked pitiful before the naked truth. "I'm afraid, Father. I don't know how to walk under sunlight anymore," she whispered. "Father will be your eyes. Father will be your legs," I said, standing up and helping her to her feet. "We must leave right now before Isabella realizes there has been an intrusion." Just as I stepped out of the steel room, a cold beep sounded from a hidden speaker in the ceiling. "Father, you've ruined my blueprint again," Isabella's voice echoed, not from Chicago. It came from the basement's internal communication system. The monitoring screen on the wall suddenly lit up, showing Isabella sitting inside the Audi, her face calm to a terrifying degree. She had never gone to Chicago. The trip was only a stress test to see how strong the structure of my loyalty truly was. "You chose the wrong side, dear Father," Isabella said, her voice hoarse with feigned disappointment. "And now you will stay there with her to finish this final blueprint." Boom! The 2-ton steel door slammed shut with a force that shook the very foundation of the house. Serafina and I were completely trapped inside the 18-square-meter space. The hydraulic engine of the steel door echoed dully in the cramped space, and to me at that moment, the sound was no different from thunder announcing a terrifying storm. Serafina and I stood frozen in the darkness of the 18-square-meter room, her breathing rapid and trembling against my shoulder. Isabella was not in Chicago. She was inside this house, or at least very close enough to control our breathing with a touch on her phone screen. Isabella had made a mistake that arrogant architects often make. She believed in the absolute authority of machines and forgot the nature of mechanics. "Sarah, listen to Father," I whispered, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "Father has to go out there. If Isabella sees both of us here, she will lose control, and we will never have a second chance." "No, Father, don't leave me!" Serafina clutched the hem of my shirt, her hollow eyes filled with terror. "Father isn't leaving you. Father is going to distract her." I hurriedly searched through my toolkit, pulled out a flathead screwdriver, and moved toward the steel door. Every proper panic room must have a mechanical emergency release system in case the electrical system fails or a fire breaks out. Silas once mentioned a backup hydraulic lever hidden behind a small ventilation grill near the floor. I knelt down and used the last strength in my aging hands to pry open the grill. Click. A cold steel lever appeared. I gritted my teeth and pulled hard. A hiss of compressed air followed, and the heavy steel door slowly began to move, opening a gap just wide enough for one person to slip through. "Sarah, you must stay here. Lock the door with the manual latch inside. Do not make a sound, no matter what happens. Father will come back to save you as soon as possible." I pushed her back into the darkness, watched the door close again, then rushed out of the studio and ran up toward the living room. My heart pounded violently in my chest when I heard the tires of the Audi grinding against the gravel in the front yard. I barely managed to sit down in the armchair, open an old book on my lap, and steady my breathing when the front door opened. Isabella stepped in. She was still wearing the deep wine-red velvet outfit, her face expressionless, though those sharp eyes immediately swept across the room like a thermal scanner. "Father is still awake?" Isabella asked, her voice calm in a frightening way. She set her handbag on the table and slowly removed her leather gloves. "I couldn't sleep. Perhaps it's the side effects of the pills you gave me," I replied without lifting my eyes from the page, though the letters in front of me were swirling chaotically. Isabella walked closer and stood directly behind me. I could feel the strong lavender scent from her body, the scent I now knew was meant to conceal the odor of captivity. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her slender fingers squeezing gently. "You know, Father, the flight to Chicago was canceled because of fog." "What a strange coincidence," Isabella said, her voice stretched with meaning. "But when I checked the security system from the car, I noticed some pressure readings in the basement had changed. Did Father go down there?" My palms were soaked with sweat. A good engineer must know how to handle variables. "Father went down to look for an old pair of reading glasses in the studio. Maybe Father accidentally touched the ventilation system. You know, Father is old now. Sometimes these hands don't obey as they should." Isabella said nothing. The silence stretched until it felt suffocating. She removed her hand from my shoulder, walked around the chair, and looked straight into my eyes. The false filial warmth had vanished from her gaze. It was the look of a predator that had sensed resistance. "Father seems clearer than usual today," Isabella said with a slight smile that never reached her eyes. "Father's eyes no longer have the confusion of someone losing his mind. That makes me both pleased and worried." Isabella began pacing across the living room, her footsteps tapping sharply against the wooden floor. She walked toward the bookshelf in the living room, then suddenly turned back. "Oh, Father, have you seen the nurse? I tried calling her, but couldn't reach her." "She said she went to buy some medicine for Father and hasn't come back," I lied, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Isabella said nothing. She took out her phone, her fingers gliding quickly across the screen. I knew she was checking the cameras. My endoscopic camera had been installed in a technical blind spot, and I had intentionally left no obvious physical trace. Arrogance often walks hand in hand with extraordinary intelligence. Isabella headed down the basement stairs without warning. I rose shakily and followed behind her. Inside the studio, Isabella stood motionless in the center of the room. She did not look at the rotating bookshelf immediately. Instead, she walked toward her desk and bent down to examine the floor. Evidence. Even though I had tried to remove everything, a small fragment of plaster from when I pried open the ventilation grill had fallen onto the gray marble floor. It was white and brutally visible under the LED light. Isabella knelt down and touched the tiny fragment with the finger wearing her diamond ring. She lifted it to her nose, then slowly turned her head toward the ventilation grill near the floor, the place where the backup hydraulic lever was hidden. "Father knows something," Isabella said as she stood up. Her voice completely changed now, low and dangerous. "Architecture is the science of control. When the smallest detail is out of place, the whole structure becomes unsafe." She took another small remote control from her coat pocket, not the one used to open the door, but one used to operate a private security camera system she had hidden even from the main server network. Did Father really think that tiny endoscopic camera could fool me? Isabella raised her phone screen toward me. On it was a clear image of me threading the cable into the bookshelf slot 2 hours earlier. My heart dropped. I had underestimated her. I thought I was the cat waiting to strike, when in truth, I was the mouse being toyed with inside a larger cage. I gave Father many chances to sleep peacefully inside this sweet lie. Isabella stepped closer, forcing me back against the studio wall. I built Father a peaceful old age and gave Sarah a place where no one could ever hurt her again. Why does Father want to destroy everything? Safe, I shouted, anger erupting beyond fear. You call imprisoning your own sister in darkness for 9 years safe? You are a monster, Isabella. You are not an architect. You are a murderer who doesn't need a knife. Isabella slapped me. The burning strike sent me collapsing onto a pile of blueprints. What do you know about beauty and sacrifice? Isabella hissed through clenched teeth. Sarah is too weak to live in the outside world. She would ruin the Sterling family's reputation. Only here can she be perfect. And now, if Father wants to be part of this design so badly, Isabella walked toward the control panel, her finger hovering over the lockdown button. I'll put Father in there with her. We will be a happy family, forever beneath this ground. Just as her finger was about to press down, a strange sound echoed from behind the steel wall. Not crying, not screaming. It was the smoke alarm. I smiled through bloodied teeth. Before leaving, I had instructed Serafina to do one thing. Use the spare lighter in my toolkit to burn the drawings on the wall right beneath the heat sensor. When the building's fire alarm system was triggered, it would automatically send a signal to the town's emergency dispatch center. A system even Isabella could not block with her phone. The wail of sirens began echoing from the distance. Isabella's cat and mouse game had officially collapsed because of a basic engineering principle. Public safety always stands above personal control. The wail of fire engines echoed from the valley, thin as a thread of sound tearing through the silent night of Hudson. In the studio, smoke from the ventilation system began to seep outward, carrying the bitter smell of burning paper and despair. But Isabella did not tremble. She stood there beneath the chandelier lights flickering from the overloaded electrical system, looking like a goddess of vengeance who had stepped out of a cursed blueprint. The slap from earlier still burned red on my face, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the coldness in my eldest daughter's eyes. She did not run. She did not defend herself with pleading words. She looked at me, then toward the steel door covered in smoke, and laughed. A dry laugh echoing like metal striking stone. You think you've won? Isabella took a step toward me, her high heels grinding against the shards of glass from the cold water glass earlier that afternoon. You think calling the police here will turn you into a hero and me into a monster? No, Father. You understand nothing about balance. Balance? I roared, my voice hoarse from the smoke. You imprison your sister for nearly 10 years and call that balance, Isabella? Yes, because she is a flaw in the structure of this family, she suddenly screamed, her beautiful face twisting with resentment buried for so long. Do you remember? You and Mother always looked at her as if she were the only sun in the sky. Little Serafina, talented Serafina, sensitive Serafina. And me? I was the only one forced to study until exhaustion to keep the Sterling name from collapsing. I built the future of this family while she used her stupidity and innocence to steal all of your attention. She stepped closer, her lavender-scented breath now tinged with madness. I didn't kill her. I protected her from herself. She wanted to run away with that Julian. She would have died on the streets within a week. I gave her a perfect room, a perfect diet, a world where she would never suffer. I am the only one who truly loves her, Father. You only love the illusion of her. I looked at my daughter and felt a profound disgust. Isabella had not only built a prison for Serafina, she had built one inside her own mind, where she stood at the center of the universe, and every cruelty carried the label of sacrifice. That's enough, Isabella. It's over. I stepped back, my hand groping for something heavy to defend myself. Over? No, we're just starting a new revision. Isabella slipped her hand into the pocket of her velvet coat. When she pulled it out, she held no gun, no knife. She held a medical syringe filled with a clear liquid. It was the powerful sedative she had forced me to take every day, and this time the dosage would surely be enough to put an old man like me into permanent sleep, or at least long enough for her to clean up the scene before the police broke in. You need to sleep, dear father. When you wake up, Serafina will truly be gone, and I will take you to the finest nursing home in Switzerland. We will begin again, a blueprint without error. She lunged forward with a speed I did not expect. I used all my strength to shove the desk over, creating a temporary barrier, then dashed out of the studio toward the dark staircase. The Sterling mansion that night became a deadly maze. Isabella had turned off the entire main lighting system. She knew this house better than anyone. She knew every shadowed corner, every narrow step. I ran through the darkness, my breathing broken, my chest stabbing with pain as if thousands of needles were piercing it. Clack. 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 The sound of Isabella's high heels echoed on the oak floor behind me. She was not rushing. She moved leisurely like a cat playing with an exhausted mouse. You can't escape, her voice came from behind a marble statue in the second-floor corridor. Did you forget who redesigned the emergency exit system of this house? Everything is locked electronically. You are inside a box, father, a box created by your own daughter. I ran into my old study and locked the door. My trembling hands searched through the tool cabinet. I did not need a gun. I needed something that could break the logic of an architect. I found the remote control for the pulley system that raises and lowers the chandelier in the main hall, a device I installed myself back in the 90s before Isabella turned this house into a smart fortress. It was a purely mechanical system, disconnected from the server and outside the control of Isabella's phone. Bang! The study doors shook under the weight of something heavy. Isabella was using a decorative axe from the hallway to break it down. Come out, father. Don't make me hurt you more than necessary. Her shout carried the madness of someone about to lose everything. I climbed over the balcony of the study, gripping the stone ledge as I descended toward the main hall. Cold wind and rain lashed against my face, but the clarity of a supervising engineer returned to me. I stood on the balcony looking down into the hall, where the half-ton crystal chandelier hung suspended. Isabella smashed open the study door, found me gone, and rushed madly onto the balcony overlooking the main hall. "Where are you?" she screamed, staring into the dark void below. "Here, Isabella." I stood on the opposite side of the balcony, gripping the pulley remote. You're right, architecture is about balance. Sometimes, to keep a structure standing, you must remove the elements that have completely rotted away. Isabella saw me and ran along the circular balcony, the syringe raised high. When she stepped directly beneath the suspension point of the massive chandelier, I pressed the button. Creak. Crash. The old pulley system screamed. The chandelier did not fall straight onto her. I am not a murderer. But the sudden drop in the cable created a violent vibration that caused the wooden balcony railing, whose screws I had secretly loosened earlier that afternoon, to collapse entirely. Isabella lost her footing and fell 4 meters onto the marble floor of the main hall. The syringe flew from her hand and shattered against the stone. Heavy pounding erupted at the front gate. "Police! Open the door immediately!" I staggered down the stairs. Isabella lay there groaning beside the shattered crystal. She was not dead, but her legs were probably broken. A bitter irony for the one who had stolen another person's right to walk beneath the sunlight. I did not look at her again. I walked straight down to the basement. The electrical system of the steel door had shorted from the fire alarm, but thanks to the hydraulic lever I had already opened earlier, I used all my strength to push the door one last time. The smoke had begun to clear. In the 18-square-meter room, Serafina was curled in the corner of the bed. When she saw my silhouette, she was no longer afraid. She looked at me with tearful eyes, the eyes of someone reborn from the ashes of deception. I lifted her in my arms. She was heartbreakingly light. As I stepped out of the studio, passing Isabella, who was being restrained by the police, my eldest daughter looked at me with hatred in her eyes, her chest heaving with miserable sobs. "Father, you've destroyed everything," she whispered through blood-stained teeth. "No, Isabella." I stopped and looked directly at her. "I only dismantled a flawed structure. A good architect must know when to tear something down and build again from the beginning." I walked out through the gate. The beams of police cars and ambulances swept across the lawn, driving away the darkness of the Hudson Valley. Serafina shivered as the first raindrops touched her skin. Then she lifted her face to the sky and took a deep breath of the air of freedom. A scent with no lavender, no bleach, only the smell of wet earth and life. The night of judgment had ended. The devil's blueprint had been torn apart. Now we would rebuild our lives upon the fragments of truth, no matter how painful they might be. The snowstorm swept into the Hudson Valley earlier than expected, turning the night into a white wall, cold and blinding. The wind howled through the cracks of the Sterling mansion, sounding like the screams of restless spirits long imprisoned. Inside the main hall, the light no longer came from the luxurious crystal chandeliers, but from the flashing red and blue lights of police cars and the blinding bursts from television cameras. Alexander Sterling stood there, one hand resting on the broken railing, the other gripping a phone. The final weapon that had allowed him to shatter the devilish blueprint of his own daughter. When Isabella was escorted toward the door by the police, she still tried to hold her head high. Her face was pale, but her eyes still burned with hatred. She saw Elias, the longtime family lawyer, standing beside a group of strangers holding cameras and microphones. "You think you can destroy me?" Isabella hissed, her voice hoarse. "Elias, tell these people to leave. This is a private matter of the Sterling family. I will sue them until they are ruined." Elias did not look at her. He looked at Alexander, who stood firm like the last foundation pillar amid the ruins. "Isabella," I spoke, my voice deep and echoing through the main hall. "You are right. Your money can buy many things. You can buy the best lawyers, media companies to wash away the truth. That is why I did not only call the police. I sent copies of the footage from the basement to the 3 largest television networks in the state and to reputable newspapers 2 hours ago." Isabella froze. The last trace of confidence collapsed on her face. What have you done?" "I turned your secret into a public blueprint," I replied coldly. "The world will know who Isabella Sterling truly is. No power, no amount of money can bury the truth once it appears on the screens of millions. You built your career upon the disappearance of your sister, so let that career be buried with this crime." Dozens of reporters stood outside the police barricade, their lenses pointed directly at the mansion. Isabella Sterling, the genius architect, had become nothing more than a criminal, exposed under the merciless light of public judgment. She screamed in despair before being pushed into the backseat of a patrol car, disappearing into the swirling white snow. I turned toward the staircase leading down to the basement. The paramedics were carefully carrying a small, fragile figure upward. I pushed through the crowd and rushed forward, taking the thin hands of Serafina in mine. She was wrapped in a shimmering, silver thermal blanket. Her eyes looked around with confusion and fear, like a creature of the deep forest suddenly dragged into a crowded square. 9 years. For nearly a decade, her world had been confined to 18 square meters and artificial cream-colored walls. "Sarah, let's go," I whispered, helping her to her feet. "Let's go outside." Serafina trembled as she clung to my arm. Each step was slow and uncertain on the marble floor. When we stepped through the mansion's front door, a wave of icy air rushed into our lungs. She stopped. Under the beams of the police floodlights, snowflakes began falling heavily. Serafina lifted her eyes toward the dark sky. She slowly extended a pale, almost translucent hand. A tiny snowflake landed in her palm and melted instantly under the faint warmth that remained. "Father, what is this?" she murmured, her voice almost lost in the wind. "It's snow, Sarah." "Real snow," I cried, holding her fragile shoulders. Serafina began to sob. She watched the snowflakes swirl through the air, watched the flashing lights reflecting off the thin ice. For 9 years, Isabella had shown her videos of nature on a flat screen, but she had never told her about the biting cold of winter, about the prickling touch of snow against skin, or the scent of freedom sweeping through the Hudson Valley. The crowd of reporters suddenly fell silent. Even the most ruthless news hunters seemed to choke with emotion at the sight of a thin girl looking like a ghost returned from death, standing there and staring at the night sky in wonder. The flashes still flickered, though without frenzy. They stood there witnessing a moment no report could fully capture, the collapse of a perfect prison. Serafina did not look at the cameras. She gazed toward the distant Hudson River, where lights from the town across the water glittered like fallen stars on the earth. "You were right," Serafina whispered, her lips purple from the cold, though a fragile smile appeared upon them. "The world is so vast. Isabella lied to me. She said the world had already disappeared." "The world has been waiting for you, Sarah." I kissed her forehead. "From this moment on, no one will ever lock you inside any blueprint again." The paramedics gently guided Serafina into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, she looked once more at the Sterling mansion, the grand castle that now resembled an ancient tomb beneath the falling snow. To her, it was no longer home. It was only a terrible error in a life now corrected with blood and tears. I sat beside her in the ambulance, holding her hand tightly as the vehicle began to move. The siren tore through the storm as we left the Hudson Valley behind us, leaving behind the ghost of Isabella. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, covering the traces of the past. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, the snow will melt, and the truth will stand fully revealed beneath the morning light. The devil's blueprint has been torn apart, and upon those ruins we will begin laying the first bricks of a new life. A life with light, with the chill of snow, and with the warmth of truth. Inside the cold interrogation room of the Hudson Police Station, the white light of a fluorescent bulb shone down upon the metal table, creating a suffocating atmosphere. I sat there behind the one-way mirror, observing my eldest daughter. Isabella still held her back perfectly straight, her face expressionless, but her sharp eyes were now empty like the windows of an abandoned building. Her testimony began to seep out, slow and merciless, shattering the final fragments of a family I once revered. The biggest question the investigators asked was, how could a disappearance be staged so perfectly that it deceived even the best private detectives for 9 years? The answer lay in a name I had forgotten: Marcus Thorne. Marcus used to be the head of systems security for Sterling Corporation, a brilliant network engineer who had fallen into gambling. Isabella testified that she had caught Marcus secretly leaking my confidential design blueprints to competitors to pay off his debts. Instead of exposing him, she used Marcus's fear as cement to reinforce her plan. Marcus was the one who used Serafina's account to purchase a bus ticket to California, creating false GPS signals along the route. He hacked into the city surveillance cameras, editing footage of a girl with a similar build appearing at the central bus station, completely misleading every effort I made to search for her. After the plan was completed, Isabella never paid Marcus. She used the very evidence of his corruption to force him to leave the United States immediately. Marcus lived as an exile in Brazil, carrying the secret of the 18-square-meter basement to the grave, until he was extradited back to the country just last night. She did not build walls with bricks. She built them with blackmail. Marcus was not an accomplice in the literal sense, only a pawn whose will Isabella had broken to serve her sinister design. Looking at Isabella through the glass, I suddenly realized I was witnessing a psychological illness disguised as genius. Criminal psychologists call cases like hers malignant narcissism syndrome. In Isabella's world, she stood at the center of every structure. Everyone around her, including Serafina and me, was not human, but merely materials serving her perfection. The jealousy within the Sterling family was not childish envy. It was an acid corroding the steel of familial love. Isabella always believed she carried the burden of protecting the family reputation, the one working 20 hours a day to keep the Sterling empire standing. Meanwhile, Serafina was the child who received unconditional affection from me simply because of her innocence and sensitivity. For a narcissist, seeing someone else receive the attention they believe they deserve is a direct insult. Isabella did not want Serafina to die. Death is an ending, and she cannot control the dead. She wanted Serafina to exist in absolute submission. Imprisoning her sister was Isabella's way of asserting the ultimate power of an architect. I can create a world for you, and I can erase you from everyone's memory. She turned love into a cold blueprint where every emotion was measured with a ruler and cruelty. When these details came to light, Sterling Associates collapsed faster than a building brought down by explosives. Partners who once felt proud to see Isabella's signature on a blueprint now rushed to remove her name from their projects. The Sterling brand transformed from a symbol of luxury into a label of sickness. Crowds surrounded our offices. Prestigious architectural awards were revoked within 24 hours. I looked at the final financial report. The empire I spent my life building evaporated with every word of her testimony. Strangely, I felt no regret. A structure built upon the foundation of imprisonment and deception will eventually collapse to return the truth to the ground. Isabella stood up when the interrogation ended. She stared directly at the one-way mirror, as if she knew I was standing there. "You destroyed the most beautiful blueprint I ever created," she whispered through lips drained of color. I turned away. I was no longer her supervising engineer. I was only a father trying to gather the broken pieces of my youngest daughter's life. Isabella's blueprint may have been technically perfect, but it lacked the most essential element of every enduring architecture: humanity. After the trials that drained the last of my remaining strength, I decided to sell everything connected to the name Sterling in New York. I did not want to keep a single brick, a single blueprint, or any block of concrete stained by Isabella's deception. I took Serafina to a quiet stretch of coast in Cape Cod, where the only sound we had to hear was not the click of hydraulic locks, but the gentle rumble of the ocean. On the day the court delivered the sentence, I sat in the front row and looked straight at Isabella's back. She did not tremble when the words, "life imprisonment without parole," were spoken. She stood straight, proud in a way that was frightening. When the police escorted her past me, she paused for a second. I had waited for an apology, for a single tear of regret, but none came. "You still understand nothing about perfection," she whispered, the same faint smile resting on her lips. At that moment, I realized Isabella was not insane. She was simply an architect so obsessed with her power that she saw human beings as materials to be carved and shaped. She chose solitary confinement, a room without windows, as a way to continue controlling her private world in darkness. Her punishment was not prison, but living an entire life inside a blueprint she had completed, with no one left to admire it. I looked at her psychological report projected on the courtroom screen, a complex diagram describing distortions in social perception and the absence of empathy. 6 months later, on the wooden porch overlooking the sea, I sat there with a cup of ginger tea in my hand, filling my lungs with the salty scent of the ocean air. This scent felt pure. It did not try to hide anything, no layer of artificial lavender to cover the smell of bleach. It was simply life. Serafina stood out there about 10 meters away on the sand. She had cut off the long, brittle hair from the years of captivity. Now the short hair made her look like a mischievous boy, but the hollow eyes from before had begun to regain their light. She was learning how to walk barefoot on the sand, a feeling she said was both ticklish and real. I looked at my own hands, the wrinkles deeper after the battle, though they no longer trembled when holding a pencil. I no longer draw towering skyscrapers. I draw sailboats, things that can follow the wind and waves to wherever they wish. Father, look! Serafina raised a shimmering mother-of-pearl shell beneath the sunset. She ran toward me, her breathing still a little quick, though her face shone brightly. I helped her sit beside me, feeling the warmth from skin that had begun to absorb the sun and sea breeze. All my life, I spent thousands of hours supervising structures, making sure everything was safe and strong. I was wrong. I realized that love is not always about placing someone inside a glass cage to protect them from the collisions of life. Sometimes it means allowing them to fly freely through a sky full of storms, even when pain and stumbles may come. Isabella built a glass cage for Serafina because she feared the chaos of life would damage her sister. I remained silent and allowed it to happen because I feared losing my child. Both of us use love as a reason to suffocate life. Freedom never needs a fixed blueprint. It needs space to breathe. The sun slowly sank into the ocean, staining the vast horizon red. Serafina leaned her head on my shoulder, her eyes narrowing beneath the brilliant light. A real light, warm and blazing, never switching off at anyone's command. Father, she whispered, will we come here again tomorrow? Every day, Sarah, until you grow tired of the smell of the sea. I will never grow tired of it, because here there is no ceiling. I tightened my arm around her shoulder. She was right. There was no ceiling here, no soundproof walls, no secret corridors. Only the two of us in the endless horizon. It took us 10 years to learn a simple lesson. To truly see the light, sometimes we must accept tearing down the entire old house. Night fell over Cape Cod, but inside my heart a new dawn had just begun. I stand here surrounded by the sound of waves along Cape Cod, watching Serafina learn how to smile at each small wave. The final blueprint of my life is no longer lifeless blocks of concrete, but her smile, a design illuminated by the light of freedom. Thank you for patiently walking with my daughter and me through the dark basements of the Sterling Mansion, through the snowstorms of deception, until reaching this quiet shore. Our story comes to an end, but I hope it has left within you an echo of the value of truth and the way we choose to love another person. If you were in my place, would you have the courage to tear down the empire you built your entire life just to exchange it for a painful truth? Which moment in this journey made you feel the most suffocated? Leave a thought below and I will read every message as a way for us to heal together. Before we truly part, I want to emphasize once more, this story has been constructed and its details adjusted to serve storytelling purposes and to convey a human message. Any resemblance in names, characters, places, or real events is entirely coincidental and unintentional. We have no intention of associating, implying, or offending any real individual or organization. Finally, from the depths of a man who lost everything to rediscover what mattered most, I send my deepest and most sincere gratitude to you, the architects of compassion. Your companionship has been an invaluable encouragement that allowed this story to be told to its end. May you always find light, even in the darkest basements of life.